Hello, you are on the Epic Life Stories channel. Today we will listen to a new exciting story. Subscribe to the channel. Enjoy watching. The story began on an ordinary Saturday morning when 16-year-old Jamal was returning from the store when he noticed an elderly woman struggling to lift heavy bags of groceries. Even though he had other things to do, Jamal couldn't pass by. He approached the woman and offered to help. Her grateful smile warmed his heart, and they walked together to her house, talking about life along the way. The next day, Jamal didn't even think about the kind act of yesterday until his morning sleep was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. When he opened it, he saw the same woman, but she was not alone. There were police officers standing next to her with serious faces. Jamal could not understand what went wrong and why kindness suddenly turned against him. Jamal froze in the doorway, unable to hide his surprise. He quickly ran through the events of the previous day in his mind, but he couldn't understand how his help could have led to such a turn of events. The woman he had helped yesterday now looked worried, her eyes darting restlessly between the policeman and the boy. "Ma'am, is that him?" one of the officers asked, nodding slightly toward Jamal. The woman hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, it is him," she answered, but there was a hint of doubt in her voice. Jamal took a step back, feeling a cold fear creeping up on him. What could have happened? Had she accused him of stealing? Or maybe something else? Images of the worst-case scenarios popped into his head, and he finally decided to ask, "What happened? Why are you here?" The policemen looked at each other, then the senior one began to speak. "Last night, this woman noticed that after your help, one of her valuables was missing. She is not sure that it was you, but decided to contact us to clarify the situation." "Is something missing?" Jamal could barely get the words out, his voice shaking with emotion. "I swear I didn't take anything." The officer looked at Jamal carefully, trying to read something in his eyes, but said nothing. The silence was becoming unbearable when suddenly the woman took a step forward. "Wait. I remembered." Her voice now sounded almost with relief. "I put this ring somewhere else, I completely forgot about it. Forgive me." She looked at Jamal with remorse. "I should not have accused you." Jamal's heart began to beat faster, a mixture of relief and hurt piercing through him. The officers nodded, exchanged glances, and headed for the exit, clearly realizing that the incident was over. Jamal stood in the doorway, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain away, leaving a feeling of devastation in its wake. The woman tried to find the words. "I was just scared and misinterpreted the situation. Please forgive me." He didn't answer. One thought was spinning in his head, how quickly a good intention could turn into suspicion and fear. Jamal stood in the doorway, his heart slowly returning to normal, but the storm inside him was only gathering momentum. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't find the words. Too much had happened in a matter of minutes: fear, confusion, hurt. The older woman was still looking at him, her gaze full of remorse, but Jamal saw in it not only guilt, but also the remnants of the very mistrust that had led to this situation. "Do you think I'm a thief?" he asked finally, in a voice that sounded harsher than he intended. The woman flinched at his words, her eyes widening. The policeman paused for a moment, then turned back to them. No, she hastened to explain. "I was scared. I didn't know what to do. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" Jamal couldn't help but smile bitterly. "You brought the police to my house because of a mistake?" The officers, sensing the tension, took a step back towards the boy, but the senior officer stopped his partner with a gesture. He himself understood that the situation had gotten out of control, and intervention would only make it worse. The woman spoke again, her voice becoming quieter. "I really thought my ring was missing. It was my husband's ring. It's very dear to me. I was just scared when I couldn't find it, and I immediately thought the worst." But her words did not comfort Jamal. His gaze darted between the police officers and the woman standing in front of him, and suddenly he felt a cold lump in his chest, not from fear, but from bitterness that had been building up for years. Did you think the worst because I'm black? He asked, looking her straight in the eye. The words hung in the air like a knife piercing the silence. The woman turned pale, her eyes widening in realization. She wanted to answer, but froze, unsure of what to say. The policeman stood tensely silent. Jamal continued, "You didn't even try to think about the fact that I just wanted to help. I could have passed by, but I didn't. And you immediately decided that I was guilty, because I don't look like your son or grandson, right?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but she remained silent, unable to deny his words. Her gaze, which had previously been full of doubt and fear, now became sad, almost broken. I don't think so anymore," she whispered, but Jamal was no longer listening. He closed the door without waiting for them to leave. Everything inside him was boiling. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing: something had changed in him. The world no longer seemed as simple and kind as it had been yesterday. Outside, the woman stood in the doorway, as if hesitating to leave. The police officers spoke quietly among themselves, but their eyes showed the understanding that they, too, were part of this world, where mistakes could be too costly. At one point, the senior officer put his hand on the woman's shoulder and said softly, "It's time to go." She finally moved, but before she left, she glanced back at Jamal's house. There was pain and regret in her eyes, but perhaps something else, too, hope that she could someday make up for what she had done. But the door remained closed. After the door closed, Jamal stood in silence, leaning against the wall in the hallway. The words he couldn't get out of his head were still ringing in his head. He felt his chest tighten, like a heavy stone was pressing down on his shoulders. All he had done was help a man in need, and now it was coming back to haunt him. Outside, the woman and the police officers walked slowly away from the house. The woman was lost in her thoughts, her steps uncoordinated, as if she were lost in her own emotions. The police officers followed her, one of them trying to calm her down, but he himself was preoccupied with what was happening. Jamal, left alone, began to relive the past, realizing how thin the line between kindness and suspicion could be. The room he was in became cold and empty. His gaze fell on the photographs on the walls, memories of happy moments with family, moments of simple human warmth and kindness. These images now seemed distant and unattainable. He didn't know how much time had passed when he decided to go outside to figure out what had happened. The sky above the city was covered with gray clouds that reflected his mood. He felt isolated, even though there were many people around. The words of the police officers and the woman's reaction left a deep mark. A few hours passed, and Jamal finally sat down on a bench in a park near his home. He watched the people passing by, how they happily talked and laughed, and thought about how easy it was to judge people by their appearance. He couldn't help but notice that many of them probably hadn't experienced such situations, and it tore at his inner world. At sunset, as the light began to fade, Jamal returned home again. His inner turmoil had not left him, and he felt that there had to be something more to it than just the negative experience. He hoped that his own life and kindness could be some symbol of change, even if he did not yet understand how. All that was left was the decision to keep moving forward despite the difficulties. Jamal knew that this event would probably change him forever, but he also knew that this experience could be part of his growth. He couldn't allow himself to become cynical and closed off. Instead, he decided that he would strive for greater understanding and compassion, both for himself and for those around him. The light in his window dimmed and the quiet of the evening enveloped him like peace after a stormy day. Jamal went to bed with the thought that tomorrow might bring new challenges and opportunities, and that he would be ready to meet them with new strength and wisdom. The next morning, Jamal woke up determined to change his mood and figure out how to move forward. However, his inner conflict remained, like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. He decided that he would not sit back and let this event define his life. Instead, he began to think about how he could use his experience to do something positive. As the day progressed, Jamal noticed that unusual events were beginning to occur in his neighborhood. There were posters on the streets announcing an upcoming meeting that called for a discussion about equality and understanding in the community. Intrigued, Jamal decided to attend, not knowing that his participation in this event could change his life forever. The gathering was attended by residents of different ages and nationalities. The moderator, an energetic young man, began the discussion with a brief introduction, but when Jamal saw on stage the same officer who had visited his home the day before, his heart began to beat faster. The officer, it turned out, was one of the organizers of the event, and his presence at the gathering was part of an attempt to improve communication and understanding between the police and local residents. When the facilitator began talking about the importance of building bridges between different groups in the community, Jamal felt that his own experience could be helpful. He hesitated at first, but then he decided to stand up and share his story. The words came out with difficulty, but he spoke honestly and openly, sharing his experience, fear, and disappointment. The room was full of respect and empathy. His speech sparked a lively discussion. Many people, including the woman who had come to his home with the police, spoke up to apologize and discuss how they could work together to improve understanding and trust in their neighborhood. An officer who was present at the meeting approached Jamal and thanked him for his courage and openness. He invited Jamal to be part of a new initiative committee that would work on programs to increase understanding between different groups in the community. The request surprised Jamal, but he realized that this was a chance to make a difference. As the week went on, Jamal became more involved in the committee's projects. He helped organize events that educated and discussed issues related to racial stereotypes and bias. His personal experiences helped shape programs that actually worked to overcome bias and build bridges between different groups. And while the process was long and difficult, Jamal felt like he was moving in the right direction. He saw his community begin to change, as people opened up and began to see each other not through the lens of preconceived notions, but as equal members of society. Jamal himself changed, too. His inner sense of justice and purpose grew stronger, and he became confident that his actions could have a significant impact on the world around him. So, instead of remaining in the shadow of his fear and disappointment, Jamal transformed his trials into a force for change, leaving a deep mark on his community and proving that even the most difficult situations can lead to positive results when approached with an open heart and mind. Several months passed, and Jamal continued to work actively on the committee, seeking to improve connections and trust in his community. He became a visible figure in the neighborhood, and his efforts began to bear fruit. Events, open discussions, and educational programs helped to develop mutual understanding and respect among residents of different ages and backgrounds. One afternoon, Jamal received a phone call that made his heart beat faster. The woman he helped with groceries, who eventually led the police to his house, wanted to meet him. It was unexpected, and Jamal hesitated, but eventually decided to accept her offer. When Jamal arrived at the cafe where the meeting was scheduled, he saw a woman sitting at a table by the window. She looked exhausted, but her face was genuinely worried. Jamal sat down across from her, and they exchanged greetings. The woman began to share how her life had changed since the incident. She admitted that she had gone through personal trials and internal changes since the incident. Being in the public eye for her actions had made her more aware of her own biases and fears. Since that day, she has thought a lot about Jamal and his reaction, and her own understanding of the world has changed. The woman said she has decided to actively participate in local initiatives to combat racism and discrimination. She has also joined several support groups and educational programs to learn more about social issues and become part of the solution rather than the source of the problem. During their conversation, Jamal noticed that her words were sincere. He knew that she truly recognized her mistakes and took steps to correct them. It was a difficult conversation, but it was an important moment for both of them. They discussed how they could work together to improve the situation in their community and support other initiatives aimed at bringing people together. Their meeting marked the beginning of a new phase in their relationship. Jamal and the woman began working together on several projects, including organizing community events aimed at improving communication and understanding. They became allies in the fight against bias and sought to use their stories to help others see how they could overcome their fears and misunderstandings. Jamal's life took on new meaning. He felt that his efforts had made a real difference, and that gave him a sense of accomplishment. Slowly, his community began to transform, people became more open, and real conversations began to take place about issues that had previously been hushed up. Over time, Jamal and the woman became not only work partners, but also friends. They continued to work together to improve their neighborhood, and their collaboration inspired many others to make similar changes. Jamal learned that even the most difficult and painful experiences can become the starting point for meaningful change if approached with an open heart and a willingness to learn and grow. Thus, the story of Jamal and the woman who once caused him fear and anxiety turned into a powerful example of the importance of understanding, forgiveness, and joint efforts to create a better society. As the months passed, Jamal noticed that the changes he and the woman had begun to implement were beginning to have a real impact on their community. Residents increasingly took part in events, discussions, and initiatives aimed at improving understanding and respect. Racial bias became a part of everyday conversation, and many began to recognize the importance of building a more inclusive and supportive society. One day, Jamal and the woman organized a large street festival dedicated to unity and diversity. The festival was the culmination of their work together, featuring different cultures, traditions, and stories. People from all over the neighborhood came to celebrate diversity and mutual respect. Music, food, dancing, and open discussions created an atmosphere of joy and unity. At the festival, Jamal saw many familiar faces, including some who had once been wary or distrustful of him. Seeing them enjoying the festival and interacting with other participants gave him a deep sense of satisfaction that he had been able to contribute to a more cohesive and understanding community. After the festival ended, as the night sky turned the warm hues of sunset, Jamal and the woman stood on the stage and looked out at the sea of smiling faces. They exchanged glances of gratitude and respect. In that moment, they realized that their collective efforts and labor had not been in vain. They had witnessed real change that had come about through their persistence and belief in the best. Jamal returned home filled with pride and satisfaction. He remembered the moment his kindness was misinterpreted and how it led to so many changes. Sometimes he still reflected on how difficult it had been to start, but now he realized that every challenge could be an opportunity to grow and improve. In his diary he wrote his last entry for that night. Sometimes life tests us, and what starts as a terrible trial can turn into an opportunity for real change. I am proud that I was able to use my trial to help build a better community. This is not the end of the road, but just the beginning. I hope that our story will inspire others to believe in the power of kindness, forgiveness, and change. Jamal went to sleep confident that his efforts had not only changed his life, but had also made a meaningful difference in the lives of others. He knew there was still work to do, but he was now ready to face any challenge, knowing that his actions and aspirations could make the world a better place. This is the end of this wonderful story. I hope you liked it, and you were imbued with this atmosphere. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel as it promotes my video. Thank you everyone for watching. Bye everyone.